Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I wanted to see if the stand still and not look at anyone thing was going to work, and it didn't. It's summer camp. I get it, right? But it should be like the hand goes up and then everybody stops. You know who has scouts? Oh, yeah. Right, that works. I was going to get a t-shirt printed that said when the hand goes up, the mouth goes shut. But I didn't know if anybody else would get the reference, so I didn't, because that could have come across as wrong. How's everyone doing? How was your first class? Great, fantastic. Good to hear. Welcome, internet audience. For those of you that have this class open in a small sub window while you're posting on Facebook, we're glad that you're here today, and we appreciate you joining us. My name is David Fox. I am a training and documentation specialist with ETC. I have been with ETC for almost 19 years. It'll be 19 years next month. Prior to working here at ETC, I taught at UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television as their master electrician. I worked for a theatrical lighting dealership called Angstrom Stage Lighting. And then prior to that, I was a freelance master electrician, production electrician, console operator, and general fixer of broken stuff. So I mentioned that as a background not to be braggadocious. There's your big word for the day. But I mentioned that really more just to kind of say I've been around a bit when it comes to some of this gear. I will tell you now, and it's really making me nervous to be like recorded and posted on the internet for this. The way I suggest maintaining a lot of gear and the suggestions that I may give you today may or may not coalesce with the nice people that pay me money and what we post in our fine manuals about how to maintain our gear. So take it for what you want, but I've done it for a bit and I've tried to find a lot of easy ways when you're trying to do maintenance. How many of you are in charge of the maintenance in your facilities? You are all in the right place then. I'm glad to hear that. So what we're going to talk about, and this is, there's a copy of this presentation on your sticks. The other thing, just as a general piece of housekeeping, is you will also find, I will keep referring to a maintenance document. I will keep referring to a worksheet and a chart. You will find a copy of that on your stick as well, where I have created my highly opinionated step-by-step guide for how to maintain your facility. So feel free to use it and steal it outright or adapt it in any way that you want. The goal with some of this class today is we will talk about it, we will walk through and demonstrate a lot of it. So my goal is to make this an interactive class. As I said, it's highly opinionated. I am certain that there are others in this room that have worked on theaters for more than one day, right? Who was born yesterday? One hand. I know that's not true. You were born at least 2 days ago, because I've seen you, if we measure time in cues, you're like immortal in all the right good ways. So if you have a difference of opinion, if you have a different way that you like to do it, if you want to share what you're doing, that's part of what this class is all about, is to let us learn from each other and not just Dave's really funky, highly opinionated way of doing things. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how to keep things healthy. We're going to talk about building an annual maintenance program. That's about the hardest thing for everybody to be able to convince people that you need to do. How many of you run 12 months out of the year on your programs? A lot of you. So developing an annual maintenance program is really hard, right? I'm going to talk about some ways to make that easier because I've had to deal with the same situations. When I was at UCLA, I was really lucky and unfortunate in that I had several months out of the year where we were dark and I was alone. So, so great, I have all the time in the world to get this done, but I don't have enough time to maintain every single fixture every single time. Or I worked in facilities that ran constantly and we were moving the gear all the time, so it makes it a little bit more difficult. But there's ways to make it happen. And the big key to that is to develop some kind of an annual maintenance program that may not necessarily be something you do all at once at one period of time. So once you get stuff maintained and you develop this idea, it becomes a lot easier to just make it happen, and a clean, happy system is a good working system. So, because I jumped a slide, but now I'll talk about it again, because repetition is the form of knowledge. We'll talk about system maintenance. We'll talk about developing that annual plan. Specifically, I want to get into some time talking about fixtures and dimmers and consoles, and we'll spend a little bit of time, I know there's some other classes that are going to talk troubleshooting, but we'll spend a little bit of time, again, going through my highly opinionated ideas of what you should do when things stop working, because that's helpful too. Right, so why do we maintain our system? These are actual pictures that people have sent me. Why do you want to maintain your system? Clean working equipment lasts longer and it works better. There are a lot of those weird, lingering, yeah, it does that sometime issues, and I'm totally going to get to it when I have time, that are poised to catastrophically fail either the first time you decide to take a day off and your boss decides to run the theater for you, because how hard could that be? Or you just simply don't have time to run around and do anything else, right? And you can maintain a lot of this stuff for yourself at the cost of your time and a few components. There's some specialized tools, but a lot of times you don't really need a lot of specialized tools, and you'll see that as we work through the presentation. Or you can pay some nice guy like me $1,000 a day to come in and clean your facility. I did this for a really long time. Before, when I was working freelance, I would go into people's theaters and they'd pay me to clean their theater. Primarily because the first time I came in to design a show in a small space, I would come in 2 days early and clean everything. And then they'd be like, wow, our theater's so much brighter now. I'm like, yeah, I wonder why. I wrote my name on dust on all the lenses before I started. So I had one designer that got mad at me because I was doing a show in rep with them, but I wasn't told by the producer that we were doing shows in rep. So I took everything down and I cleaned it and I put it back up because I was told I had to keep focus. And they came back in and they had to re-cue their entire show because the entire show was like 50% brighter. They're like, what did you do? I dusted. So you can absolutely pay some nice guy like me to come in and clean your facility for you. And you know, I'm all happy to do that. My kids got to eat, somebody's got to pay for the pony. But I'd much rather teach you the skills that you need to be able to clean a facility yourself. And the first and most important step to that is to develop some level of maintenance plan. I call it an annual maintenance plan because if you call it one, then it's a little easier to throw into your calendar. People will be more respectful if you say a maintenance plan as opposed to cleanup days, because they assume cleanup days is just you sitting around watching YouTube videos, which you should totally do while you're cleaning or while you watch a presentation on how to do this. So first step is find a dark time to work, and that can be tricky sometimes. Sometimes it can be days, sometimes it can be between shows. Sometimes you can schedule an extra work call in and around, but find the times. Estimate how much time it's going to take to do some of these things, and then work the times out on that. Make a checklist. That way you know what you need to do, or you can hand that checklist off to some people and say, hey, I'd like you to go maintain dimmer rack 1 today. Right? Take that 10-15 minutes and fix that first rack. Leave the power on. We'll do a deep cleaning later, but just get that maintained. Or we're going to go within and, you know, that big pile of cable that nobody coiled correctly, let's maintain the cable while we're putting it away, right? You're touching it anyway. Take an extra minute and you can go through and do some of that maintenance and some of those things at the same time. There's one on the stick. You'll see there's a sample of it there, but you're welcome to print it out. But it goes through all the different components, specifically with powered components. I made a point of going through and talking about things that you can do while the rack is energized versus what you can do while the rack is de-energized. Safety is important, right? If you talk to Jen Christensen, who's one of our field project coordinators, some of you are nodding your heads, you know Jen? What's Jen's first rule? Don't get dead. That is a good first rule. One of my rules is never touch your tongue to anything electric, which is a similarly good rule, right? So how many of you know about NFPA 70E, arc flash protection, have to deal with it in your facilities? This lockout, tag out for electrical equipment, more hands are going up, right? So there's certain things, NFPA 70E is all about arc flash protection and what you can do with devices under load versus what you can do with devices not under load. Lockout, tag out is all about electrical safety. I guarantee over the next coming years you're going to learn more about it because OSHA's really becoming a stickler for these kinds of things, as they should, right? Not getting dead is probably the most important thing you can do on any given workday. Second only to not getting somebody else dead. Maybe that's more important to you. That's got like really real, didn't it? All right, I'll let the moment pass. So I do segment out what you can do with electrified gear versus non-electrified gear. Heed those warnings, right? Because you don't want to hurt yourself or others. So you can use this, review what's on your stick and improvise it to match your facility as well. Not every facility has the same gear. I tried to make it fairly generic so it doesn't say sensor specifically. I understand not everybody has sensor racks. I know we were talking at breakfast this morning. You don't have sensor racks, but you can still do all these same things, right? Most dimming racks do this. They're a color and they use electricity and they have things in them that come out. Right, so those need to be maintained. And filters, right? Filters are a big one. And I'm going to go through each of these step by step as we work through the presentation. Fixtures is the big one, right? Fixtures is probably the hardest one to be able to schedule some regular maintenance on because you either deal with the rep plot, which means they never come down, or you transition between shows really, really, really quickly, which makes them really hard to do. Pull them in batches if you need to, especially if you're doing rep plot, right? One pipe at a time. You know, plan on an extra hour in your changeovers for 3 or 4 shows, maintain each pipe one at a time as you're working through it, and by the next thing you know it, in a month all your fixtures are maintained. Right? So it doesn't have to be this huge, grandiose, I need to pay 5 people for 2 weeks kind of deal that makes management choke. You can find ways to do it in some different ways. I will show you some really quick ways to be able to maintain fixtures and get most of what you need to get done quickly. When I worked in the dealership, we had all source 4s, and we turned our fixtures around really quickly because we were one of the first dealers in Los Angeles to have source 4s. So as you can imagine, our inventory didn't stay in the shop very long. It was a really cool time. I'll tell you about it at lunch. But basically they would come in, come out of a box, get maintained, and go back into a box and go back out on a truck and leave. Pretty much the same day all the time. So we got pretty quick at finding ways to be able to maintain them. I'll show you some of that. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out process. So when I talk about maintaining systems, I break it down into a couple of different kinds of components. We're looking at some different components and families here. Regardless of what you actually have, this is how I kind of break it down, and this is how I try to think about maintaining things. You've got control products. These are things people touch. You've got dimming or power products. These are the things that make things turn on and off. Don't forget off. Off is equally important. You have fixtures. That's what the light comes out of. Basic. If that was like new for anybody, awesome. That was good, right? You've learned the most important thing you could learn at ETC and at Q right now. Light comes out of fixtures. And last but not least, you have accessories. And those could be nodes or equipment racks or all that other gack, right? Other stuff is as a sign that seems to endlessly fill rooms of your facility. This is all the different components that we need to look at and work with and think about. Because any one of these, when it fails, you know, right? Any one of these, as they go bad, can take down entire racks of components or all kinds of other things. So far, so good? Too fast, too slow? All right, so let's talk about consoles. Hey, I have consoles in here. They didn't tell me I was going to have props. I mean, I brought props. When I put the list together of what I wanted for the class, Sasha was like, you have more stuff than anybody else. Why? I said, I'll tell you why, and you'll find out why in a minute. She's like, okay, that makes sense then. So when you're maintaining controls, and I put the new hotness up there and the old equally hotness up there. Expression 2, anyone? Anybody have the pleasure? You had a 3? You had a 3? My first ETC console was an Insight 108. My second was the first Expression, which I took on tour with a dozen IntelliBeams and 35 color scrollers. Wow. Boy, when they made a console with a second wheel, was I a happy man. But you maintain these a little differently. And when you're looking at maintaining consoles, regardless of whose console you have, I break it up into 3 categories. Cleaning it, updating it, and making sure you keep backups. So let's talk about cleaning it first. Always fun. So when you're cleaning the console, these are kind of the steps you want to go through. And I use a couple of tools when I'm cleaning the consoles. You'll see a through line in a lot of these tools. These are really specialized, so you may have to look long and hard to find some of these tools. The first tool that I use when cleaning a console is a clean, dry, never touched paint in the history of the universe paintbrush. I like the big ones because that's less cleaning. Right? You can do small ones if you want, but that's step 1. Clean, dry, never touched paintbrush. That's step 1. Step 2, lint-free cloth. So far, so good, right? You know, we sell these in our swag shop. We don't sell these in our swag shops. If you are dealing with people that don't know how to use a Sharpie and tape at the same time, i.e. coloring outside of the lines was never a lesson they learned. Goo Gone can be your friend, right? You can use all kinds of other fancier things. I've looked at all kinds of other solvents. Then I started working at a state university where I had to provide an MSDS and appropriate safety gear and chemical training for any product I used. Welcome to California. I stopped using really fancy chemicals because I didn't want to have to deal with all the mishigas, if you will, of having to carry safety gear and respirators and all that other stuff, right? So Goo Gone becomes your friend. Not included in my fancy toolkit would be the Q-tip that you might use with the Goo Gone, right? Because you don't want to just pour this all over the console. And then rubbing alcohol. You can use rubbing alcohol as well, and we'll talk about rubbing alcohol in a moment. So may I have a volunteer to clean the console? All right. We'll pretend it's dirty for the moment. So we'll pretend it's dirty. So Liz, thank you for coming up. Step one, I'll give you your tools. So the first thing we want to do is to remove the dust. And we do this by taking our paintbrush and brushing off the console. Is that hard? You doing all right with that? It's so difficult, right? You want to go through and you can do the buttons. You could do this while it's on and see what key commands you come up with. You could do it while it's off. Whichever way you want to do it. This is one of those things that you keep it in the. If you want to keep it in the booth, that's fine. Just make sure that your painters don't find it, right? Because the clean, dry, never touched paint in the history of time is the really most important part. Once it's touched paint, it's no longer your paintbrush. It's no longer a cleaning tool. Now it's paintbrush. That does us no good. Once we feel that it's successfully dusted, the nice thing about the brush is you can use it to get in between the cracks. If you're finding a lot of goo, maybe a little Goo Gone and a Q-tip gets rid of all those finger things, although telling people to wash their hands helps too. The lint-free cloth is to clean the screens. If you've got gooier screens or people that eat gummy bears and burritos and work on your screen and console at the same time, it happens, right? Not gummy bear burritos, because that would be hideous, but gummy bears and burritos. You might want to use some kind of glass cleaner. My recommendation is if you're willing to put it on your glasses, you can put it on the console. If you're not willing to put it on your glasses and right next to your eye, why put it on your $50,000 desk? Good rule of thumb? Everybody learned something. You're like, oh, I feel like I'm learning already. Thank you. Thank you very much. And for coming up and for cleaning the console, you get a console cleaning shimmy. Yeah, ooh. See, next time I ask for a volunteer, everybody's going to be like clamoring over tables. Don't worry, I need a lot of volunteers. So we remove the dust. The next thing we want to do is clean the faders. And this is where paths divert. You're going to get a lot of information back and forth about how to do this with either type of desk. And really what's changed is with modern consoles like these where you have motorized faders, the way I clean them has changed as well. So other tool, really handy tool to have, this also helps with bigger dust bunnies, is a can of air, right? You can just give a couple of little shots. Pretty easy so far. You don't necessarily want to dig it in there as far as you can and try and blow as hard as you can. I like a can of air as opposed to running a lineup from the scene shop. You'd think that isn't something I'd have to tell people in a class, right? But two reasons. Number one, yeah, you can come up with enough pressure off of that compressor to actually blow chips off the board. I call that a revenue stream. Or it's usually pretty wet air, right? So if the purpose of cleaning all the dust off your board is to blow wet air on it, now you've made mud. And now you're going through a whole different set of cleaning process. So try to avoid that, right? A nice clean dry air source. I'll give them a little Zots just to clean and get the schmeggy out if you need to. But then when you're actually cleaning the faders, there are a couple of different solutions. So if I'm looking at using older boards, and my rule of thumb is kind of motorized faders or color source. But if you're looking at anything that's got a non-motorized fader, my favorite cleaning tool for years, oh my gosh, I'm missing a crop. Good thing I have it on the slide, is Deoxit. This is a product made by a company called Caig Labs, C-A-I-G. I first started using this particular product in 1990. So I can tell you that it works, and I haven't ever seen any long-term damage on it. The spray, it comes in a whole bunch of different versions. I usually have a pen with me, which I don't seem to have right now. Oh, it's at my house, because I just used it to clean all the connections on one of my computers. I'll get that tonight. The next class will get to see it, I'm sorry. Aw. Okay, I got a pout, that's all I need. But Deoxit is a great product. It cleans, it lubricates, it puts a protective coating on the inside of the fader. It doesn't damage or harm the fader in any way. I use it on DMX connections as well. You can use it on audio connections. I got it when I was working as a monitor engineer, and that was what the main engineer used. Anything that the people who are running your audio, how many of you also run your audio? Okay, anything you're using right now to clean your soundboard, and you should be cleaning your soundboard, but anything you're using to clean your soundboard, you can use to clean the faders in older, non-motorized consoles. Unless you have motorized faders on your soundboard, in which case, wait. But this product works fantastically. I've used it for years. It works really, really well. A quick little spray. You don't have. The goal is not to flood the fader, but really just one spray. Run the fader up and down 3 or 4 times. It's going to break that debris, clean it, and coat it. And if you do that once a year, your faders are going to work really, really well, and you're not going to run into problems. So it's really easy to do. If you do have motorized consoles, if you are working with some motorized faders or newer stuff, what I use instead is just isopropyl alcohol. You can buy in a lot of places or steal from a local science lab. They make some right-angle droppers where you can fill a little container. Does everybody kind of know what I'm talking about? It's a little plastic container that's got a little pin tube that comes out that then bends at a right angle so you don't pour it all over yourself when you try to drop a little bit. Get one of those. You can pick them up at stores for fairly inexpensively. Put some straight isopropyl alcohol in. 70% works fine, so just your store-bought stuff. You don't have to go super expensive. Once you move to denatured alcohol, now you need gloves, now you need protection, now you need ventilation. Don't worry about it. Right, just straight isopropyl alcohol, same thing, couple of drops, run it up and down a few times, it'll clean the dust out, and most importantly, it'll keep that motor working. What I found the hard way is if you use deoxit on motorized faders and you lubricate the fader, it doesn't so much with the stop, right? So you hit go and it kind of goes woo, and it's like, I just randomized my console. Not the best thing, right? So it's not going to hurt it other than the fact that it's not really going to stop very well. So isopropyl alcohol is what our repairs department uses, and I've been recommending this as well, and it works really well. So the biggest things to remember is just a little drop or two will do you. Yes?
Do you spray it because there's the little plastic covers?
Yeah.
For the fader? Do you spray it? Do you go inside?
I'll typically take the tube and go inside of the little plastic cover, just enough that I can see the tip has disappeared. Give it a spray and run it up and down. It doesn't matter if you spray the top or the bottom. I guess, as I think about it, I always spray the top because gravity and the slant, and I somehow think that's going to work better. It probably doesn't matter, but I usually spray the top and then run it up and down. Yes?
You said your repairs department. Does that mean your repairs department cleans every item that comes in?
We do. We do a lot of maintenance on consoles as they come in, especially if they show up and they're really gross. We won't necessarily pull tape and clean Sharpie. We did sometimes, and some people were like, thank you so much, and other people were like, oh my god, what did you do? Now I don't know what it controls anything anymore. Well, move the fader up and see what turns on. What was that middle part again? So yeah, we'll typically clean faders and give them a little cleaning, especially if we find things in tests that don't seem to be working really well. But you can do this just as easily for yourself, and it doesn't have to happen with every show. Once a year, twice a year, depends on how active things are. Depends on what we do with some of the other things down here in the maintenance list, which we'll get to in a moment. So isopropyl alcohol works. Next, yes?
The old Expression 3 series buttons,
Mm-hmm.
when they get sticky,
Yes.
alcohol.
I use deoxit. So if you're working with older desks, or even with these, it'll work. A keycap remover. Just pop them up with a keycap remover. If you have any EOS console that you've had for more than 3 years, we've probably sent you at least 2 as we've changed the keycaps around. That's always fun, right? Remember where they go before you take them all off. Yeah. Take a picture. Take a picture is a really good one. But yeah, you can pop the keys, a couple of squirts of deoxit, and see if that clears up the issue. If it doesn't, it might be a bad button at that point, and you may need to look at a repair. If you're handy with a soldering iron, especially with the expression line, if you're handy with a soldering iron, you might be able to do that repair yourself. If you're handy with a soldering iron and you're working with some of our newer consoles, you may or may not. And the only reason that I say that is not because I question anyone's solder ability, although our repairs department does. And they should, right? But I remember when I was in training and I was working with them and soldering stuff, and they're like, well, we guess this is okay. I'm like, I thought it was good. But I learned very quickly that I wasn't. They're amazing. Long story short, newer consoles, we've gone to lead-free boards. So standard rosin core solder will not work, and standard rosin core solder tools will not work. You need a lead-free solder assembly or a ball solder assembly. And if you have one of those, repair anything you want. And if you don't, we'll be more than happy to do it for you, or a local shop can do it for you. So yeah, with the expressions, especially with the buttons, you can do that if you're finding stuck ones. I tend to avoid pulling things apart unless I have to.
But they tend to get stiff after sitting a while.
They might, yeah. But a squirt of deoxit in those, especially with the older style consoles, will work. And with these newer ones, it'll probably do the same thing. I use deoxit on my computer keyboard, so I wouldn't feel bad about using it on these. But motorized faders, maybe if you want to play a joke on somebody. But that stuff lasts for a really long time. Other things, if you want to open the desk, if you're into that kind of thing, or if you've got a particularly dirty, dusty environment, you do indoor, outdoor stuff, or a really dusty theater, you can open them up, check the boards on the inside, a little bit of air, spray it out, make sure the fans are running. My rule of thumb on whether or not I should open a console is I look at the fans on the back of the console. And if it's off and I can look at the fans and I can very clearly see a wonderful brown, beige, white colored ring on what should be a black item, it's probably not a bad idea to open the console up and clean it. Paintbrush, little spray. If it's really, really disgusting and hideous, you can do some board cleaning stuff. But give us a call if you need to do that. You don't have to. I use a product called Blue Wash if I'm cleaning circuit boards. It's Blue Wash, BLUEWASH. You'll notice it in an electronics shop because it looks very similar to the can of deoxit, except at the top, instead of a spray nozzle, it's got a big brush because it's designed to like squirt and wipe. So you can use a little bit of that to clean off some stuff. That's a non-conductive, non-corrosive cleaner. Be gentle that you don't accidentally start pulling components off the board, but if you need to clean it up that way, you can do it. Much better than trying to put it in the dishwasher. So make sure the fans are running, make sure it's clear of blockages, make sure all your connections are solidly connected in, maybe give those a clean if need be. I usually use that as a great time. This isn't on the slides, but it's a great tip that I mentioned. It's a great time to label your connections. I can't tell you how many phone calls I've received in my years in phone support where someone has called me and said it's plugged in and it's not working. And I'm like, well, what is it plugged into? Click. Aha, we found the problem. Right, so if you have multiple universes of DMX coming off the back of your console, I either grab a paint marker or a piece of colored electrical tape and I label both ends of that cable, and then I take the similarly colored paint marker and I put a dot on the plug-in connection underneath the table. So if I'm not there, all someone has to do is match the colors and they can plug it in. If you're dealing with people that are red-green colorblind, then do like a 2-dot or symbol, Plug the star into the star, or whatever you want to do. Keep it covered. We make dust covers. Your product probably came with one. If it didn't, challenge your costume department to build you a dust cover, right? Take a furniture blanket and a sewing machine and you can come up with a really nice dust cover, but keep it covered. It makes a big difference. If you can keep it covered when it's not in use, which is what? 12 to 14 hours of an average day once you've gotten through tech, assuming you ever get out of tech. That's going to make a big difference in keeping it dust-free, in keeping it spill-free, in keeping people from putting really heavy, wet, greasy things down on top of that, because they'll just do it on the dust cover instead. If the fire sprinklers go off in the booth, maybe it's not going to get as wet. But keep it covered, because that makes a big distance in protecting it, especially when it's going down into the tech table or any place like that. Rule of thumb, console's off, it should be covered. Anybody who argues with you, any of your operators who are like, you don't need to do that, you can patiently put an arm around them and remind them that it costs more than their car. And that sometimes helps. Last but certainly not least in this is establish boundaries around the console. No food and drink at the console table. Right? If you've got somebody who insists on eating gummy bears and burritos, give them a second table to put their food on. You're not going to win that fight, right? Especially when you're making some poor person, and that poor person could be you, sit behind a desk for 9 hours for dance showcase tech rehearsal, right? Put the food on a separate table, put the drink on a separate table, but keep them separate. I got called into a facility once because their EDI console wasn't working. I'm sure there's a joke there somewhere. Now, I keep forgetting I'm being streamed. I gotta really be careful. So, working with a console, and they were reporting that faders and things weren't working. I came in and I started cleaning it up. I opened it up and I got it all clean, and I brought them in and said, okay, I cleaned your console. And they said, well, what was the problem? And the console was sitting here, and next to it I pointed to the mound, like double fist sized mound of food, including an entire intact potato chip. I don't know how that got in the console. That was a skill, right? But They said, what's wrong with my console? And I said, that was what was wrong with your console. So keep the food, keep the drink, keep all of that stuff away. You may want a Coke, your console absolutely doesn't. And Sasha will attest to that. We deal with liquid and protein and all manner of spills in desks, and that does not make them happy. If it happens, turn it off as quickly as you possibly can. Let it dry. Use the blue wash or something like that to try and go in and clean it, and that might save you some time. But if it gets wet and it suddenly stops operating, there's not very much you're going to be able to do on your own. That's kind of sad trombone music. I will remind you that we have technical support, and as part of our technical support, we do offer loaners during repair. So that can definitely help you out during that point. Next, update. That thing it does that you hate, we probably fixed it. I'll leave it at that. That thing you wish we had done, we might have added it, especially in like a period of time that I will not disclose. So update your desk, right? We're pretty good about announcing when new updates are available on the website and putting out release notes. Check for the software, do those updates, because that might solve some of the problems that you're running into. It keeps things up and running. It eliminates a lot of incompatibilities. However, unless you are being specifically confronted by a bug that you have to get fixed right now, do not update in the middle of a run. Don't update your console right in the middle of a show, because that thing that we fixed that you loved, we might have fixed, and now it's suddenly gone away, or we've changed the communication protocol or something like that. If the show's running and it's working, just wait. Do your update after that. At the same time that people do updates, I also recommend you take a little bit of time to look at the hard drive and clear out some of the directories. If you have somebody who is running one of your shows who is a paranoid board op like me, I save the show every time I walk away from the desk. It's a good practice to be in. And I have multiple copies of the show. I start the day, I make sure the show is saved. I do revisional saves as I'm getting up and walking away from the desk. I break for lunch, I go back and I save over the main copy of the show. I do revisional saves through the rest of the day every time I get up, and then I'll save an end of the day version of the show. So that when that design, and I did that because I had a designer that would look at me and go, that thing in Q sequence we did like 3 days ago, can I have that back? I'm like, sure, let me get the magic wand. Now you can load partials of shows, but if you have somebody like me working on your desk and is saving shows, by the time I'm done with the run and ready to walk into tech, I may have 50 shows saved on the hard drive. How many do I need? 1. Do I remember to clear out all those shows before I do the next show? So look at your directories, right? Clear out the stuff you don't need so that you're not bogging down the directory and filling it up with a ton of things. 1, it makes it easier to find things. 2, in some of our older consoles, especially of Session 2, if you fill that hard drive with stuff, it's going to want to display that directory sequence for you every time it boots up, and the more shows you have on the hard drive, the slower the console gets. That's always fun. So I try to clear the directories out. Just do a little maintenance at the same time. Last but not least, back up your show. Right? Save early and save often is my motto. It is a good motto to get into. Every time I get up and walk away from the desk, I save the show. Because you never know. Right? Save early, save often. I follow the standard computer rule of 3-2-1 in saving shows. Am I paranoid? Yeah. How many shows have I lost in my career? 1. Then I started doing this. 3-2-1. 3 backups. 2 different forms of media, 1 in a separate location. God forbid the theater could burn down, a stage weight could land in the middle of the console. I still have the show. Right? Dropbox, Box.net, the cloud, as my mother-in-law likes to call it. And she might be watching this because I'm being live streamed. Hi, kidding. The cloud is a perfect way to save that show file directory in some easily accessible offsite location. Right? I typically, if I'm doing 2 forms of media, the hard drive, a USB stick. The USB stick may or may not be hidden inside the console, so I know where it is every single time, but it isn't like sitting around where someone's like, score, USB stick. Or isn't with me in case I walk in front of a bus. Don't walk in front of a bus. That follows the don't get dead part we talked about earlier, right? It all ties back together. So keep your backups. Save copies of the show. Questions on console stuff? War stories anybody wants to add? Dead silence. Awesome. So let's talk about power controls. After a sip of water. Power controls, I break this down into, again, 3 categories as I look at them. I clean, I inspect, and you document. And let's go through and talk about those. First off, start with inspecting. Maybe you do or don't need to clean. If you've never, how many of you have cleaned your dimmer rack? And I'm just going to leave it at that part. Okay, keeping those hands up. How many of you have cleaned your dimmer rack in the last 12 months? Keep your hand up. How many have cleaned your dimmer rack in the last 6 months? Keep your hand up. Awesome.
I've had mine 4 months.
You've had yours 4 months. All right. I'll allow it. So at least once a year, if you've never cleaned your racks, in that cleaning your rack, hands back up again. How many of you cleaned the inside of your rack? It's okay. Some hands came down. Okay, fair enough. You got strand racks, and we were talking at breakfast, and it's not because he has strand racks that he needs to clean the inside.
You have sensor racks as well.
Sensor racks, yeah.
4 different spaces.
Cleaning the inside makes a big difference. So let's talk about and walk through some cleaning here. So I want to go through a couple of steps. First thing I want to talk about is the stuff that you can do while the rack is still on, because this is easy stuff. This is stuff that you could send somebody up to do when you have a little bit of time in between shows or an extended break, or that person that you just really need to have go away from you for a little bit and you want to give them something useful to do. We all have this person. So may I have a volunteer? All right. You're next, okay? I promise. I was trying to find somebody on this side of the room. All right, so tools. Put this over here. Just leave that on the desk. If there was a dust cover, we'd be fine, right? Okay, so for cleaning the powered portion of your dimmer rack, there's a couple of tools that you're going to need. These are some highly specialized tools. It was only funny the first time, right? What is this? Repeat after me. Clean, dry, never touched paint in the history of the universe paintbrush. That's pretty much what you know. I like your shirt. That's pretty much what we need. So we're going to come to the rack. The rack, is the rack on or off?
It's on.
It's on. We know that it's on. So we're not going to do anything inside the rack that could involve us getting dead. Right? We're going to deal with the outside stuff of the rack only. So first thing we're going to do is kind of look at the rack. We're going to do some inspection. How dirty is it on the outside? Because that's usually an indication of how dirty it might be on the inside.
Really all that dirty.
It's not really all that dirty because guess who maintains a lot of our gear? So the next thing we'd want to do is open up the rack door. Again, totally safe to do. If you have a key, this is the time to use your key. This is the time when I get happy that these open further than 90 degrees. So we've got a couple of components that are in here. We've got our modules, our power control modules. We have our power controller itself, and we have our filter. A lot of the time when you look at these racks and think, oh, this filter doesn't look that bad, the thing to remember with most of our power control products is the way that they work is there is a fan on top that blows air up. So putting stuff on top of this is always a bad idea to begin with. But it blows air up, and it does that by pulling air through the front of the door and then through the filter and then through the modules. So just because this side's clean doesn't mean the other side isn't like a soupy, muddy mess. So you want to remove the filter.
See, what's the easiest way with this?
I just lift up, because they're designed to lift up a little higher, grab it by the bottom and pull it out. So they come right out. Has everybody done this before? Has anybody not done this before? All right, so I'll go through it quickly then, because you guys have all done it. I should just sit down. You guys can. All right, so you're going to want to look at the filter. You're going to want to inspect it. You're going to want to see how dirty it is. They're usually not this clean. Yours are. But they're usually not this clean. So when you're getting ready to clean it, step one, take it outside of the dimmer room, right? Because if you just dust it inside the dimmer room, where do you think all that dust is going to go? Right back to the filter. It had a home and it liked it there. We want to displace it, right? So take it out of the theater, take it out of the room, and clean it that way. You can clean it in a couple of ways depending on how dusty it is. Clean dry air source works. If they're really hideous, you can wash them. They're electrostatic filters. There's nothing wrong with washing them. If you're going to wash them, however, you want them to be fully dry before they go back into the rack. And thus you're sucking moisture into your dimmers. You would think I shouldn't need to say that, right? But you want to give them a good wash. I know that there's a couple of people that I've talked to that just have 2 sets of filters. So they take one out, they put the new one in, especially if you've got to work quickly. You just buy a second filter. They're not that expensive. I want to say they're something less than $100,000. I don't know how much anything costs. Nobody ever tells me. So they're cheap, but pick up get an extra set of filters if you have to work quickly. If not, take them out, blow them out with some air, use a brush to dry them, hose them down, whatever you need to do to get them clean. Once they're dry, you're almost ready to put them back in. The next thing that you're going to want to do is look inside the door, because anything that didn't stick to the filter fell down to the bottom of this door cavity right here. So you want to clean all that out as well. Paintbrush works for that. Small vacuum works for that as well, like a dust buster or something like that. That's a slightly more specialized tool. You just want to go in there and clean that out and get the dust out. I also will take as a tendency, just because, you know, I'd like to touch dirty things, leave that as it is. I'll put my hand in and just kind of give a wipe right here, and then look. I don't do a white glove. I'm not that crazy. It doesn't have to be that clean. But if it's dirty, then I'll take that same brush and brush inside those vents and get it all nice and cleaned out. So that's pretty much cleaning the outside. While it's still open and while it's still running, I'll do a quick look at the modules as well. They're pulling air directly in the front here. That's what's cooling the chokes. They're pulling air directly into the slots here. That's what's cooling the power cube or the SCR. So look at them and see how dusty they are. If you can get to a point where the fan's off, or even if you really can't, that's when I'll take the brush again and do a quick dusting of them just to knock off the big hunks of dust, right? If they're super duper dirty, and sometimes you look at them and they will be, that's an indication to me that I probably want to do an inspection of the inside of the rack as well, right? If they're not super dirty, chances are the rack's probably pretty clean. So I may do this cleaning, depending on how dirty your dimmer room is, and only you know that, and you don't have to tell me. That'll give you an indication as to how often you should do what we just talked about. At least once a year. Some people do it more often than that. I worked in an outdoor facility where the dimmer racks were located in an interior equipment room that didn't have an airtight door. Friends of mine that are watching this know where I'm talking about, but I won't mention the name. And in that case, we cleaned more regularly because we needed to. So once you're done, you can put the filter back in. They just pop back into place. It doesn't matter which direction it goes. There's no upside down, right side up, inside, outside. It's the same material on both sides. Once it's dusted, you're clean and you're done. And you get a blue ETC Mega Combo wrench. I know, super fancy. Yeah, ooh, yeah. It's not going to get much better. So that's just a quick inspection and a quick cleaning. If it looks like we're going to need to work on the inside of the rack, then we start looking at some other things. So, I promised you could be next. You get to deal with the electrical part. Come on up. So, if we're going to need to work inside of the rack, what is the first thing that we need to do? De-energize the rack, right? And this is going to be based off of your site-specific safety protocols. De-energize, lock out, tag out, whatever appropriate arc flash protection you're going to need to do in your facility is going to need to happen before you can work on the inside of the rack. So just bear that in mind. I don't know what that is because I don't work in your facility. I don't think. Pretty sure I don't. Okay, so the first thing we're going to want to do, if I do, I have to show up for work at 7. All right, so the first thing we're going to want to do is power down the rack. Now in this case we're lucky because we know our switches are right there, so you can go ahead and turn those off. We know the rack has been powered down. If we wanted to, I could unplug it here as well, but I know that those switches work. Trust me that those switches work. I'm not going to get you dead. That's the second rule. Once we know that it's off and we know that we have control of the power source, right? So do you feel reasonably comfortable that you have control of the power source? I'm not going to get any closer than this, I promise. Okay, so we're going to open up the dimmer rack. And at this point, we can now safely work to remove modules and control components. And if I'm doing this, and if you've never done anything like this with your rack before, this is one of the this will be a lengthy piece of maintenance, but this is one of those things that once you've done it, unless it's really dirty in your environment, you probably only have to do this every couple of years. But what we're going to want to do is remove the modules. So we turn off the breaker, double safe, right? Remove the module from the rack. And then with that module removed, we're going to take a look at it. And what you're looking for when you're looking at that module itself is it really dusty? Is there a lot of dust inside the choke? Is the power cube dusty? Do I see any discoloration on any of the wire anywhere? That might indicate to me that there's a problem in the system I need to be aware of, a loose connection somewhere, some power issues. Do I see a whole bunch of little weird white or green dots that indicates there might have been some water intrusion? Water plus conduit equals yuck, right? But it happens sometimes, and sometimes it happens and you don't know. The module won't lie to you, right? Copper has a way of reminding you about every time it's gotten wet. Just ask the Romans. So you can look and see if there's anything that you need to work with or deal with. If it's particularly gross or dusty, we can use our same paintbrush that we used on the outside of the rack. Right? This is the only time I'd use it twice, so we can do some dusting if need be. If it's hideously dusty, our trusty can of air, just spray the big hunks out. If it looks like we've seen some water intrusion, at that point, you're going to kind of need to do a more thorough inspection, maybe talk to a service person and figure out what's going on. So that's always a good thing to work with and take a look at. So we would do that for the rest of the modules in the rack. I typically pull them out one at a time and I stack them in a way that I remember which way they go in, right? Because you don't want to put them in the wrong places, unless you have all the same module type in the rack. The other thing you'll want to do is once you have enough of them out, is I'll typically come in, I'm just going to pull one more. So that one's a little dirtier. All right, thank you. You get your choice. There you go. All right. Thank you. So I'll come in and I'll make sure the fan spins. Just give it a feel to see if it spins. Make sure it spins in both directions because you want it to move in both directions. Again, I like to touch dirty things. I'll look at my finger. If my finger's really dirty, I'll get in there with some air and I'll dust the fan out a little bit. So just because remember that if there's dust sitting in the fan, every time the fan turns off, it's going to go somewhere, typically where I don't want it to be. So I'm going to put my modules back in the rack. And I'll go through the entire rack and do this. And at the same time that I'm doing that, I'll also take a look at the distro boards on either side. I'm looking for bent pins. I'm looking for charring. I'm looking for any signs of a short because that might indicate to me that there's another problem. I'll pull the main module out. Again, I'm looking at this. What I'm really looking for is how dirty is this? This is what I want it to look like, so I might not need to do anything. And if you're seeing your racks looking this clean, you don't need to get this thorough. Once you get everything out, look at the bottom of the rack. Grab that vacuum we had just talked about and clean up all the debris on the inside of the rack. That typically doesn't come back, right? All the stuff the contractor didn't take out when they left. You have that.
Welding rods.
Yeah. Welding rods, little bits of plastic, little bits of wire. Sometimes you can find some other fun stuff. Tools. I've pulled airflow modules out of racks and found screwdrivers. Hey, free tool. Yay. So those are the things you're looking for. Bent pins, charring. Look for any changes, right? Especially if you're doing this on a regular basis, look to see if anything's changed. If you're seeing changes on the inside of the rack, check your conduit. It should be airtight. All of your conduit seals should be tight. We want this to be an airtight enclosure so that air is flowing through the front only. And if you've got leaks in your conduit, that's going to cause some airflow issues. It's also going to cause some water intrusion. If you need to restuff your conduit, it just sounds weird when I say that, what I recommend is going to your local hardware store and buying a can of Great Stuff. It is great stuff. Stick it up into the conduit about as far as you can get it to fit up and spray on your way down. Make sure you're catching it with something underneath so it doesn't drip all over the inside of your rack. Don't let it be your hand. Great Stuff is great stuff, but it sticks to everything. I have a shirt that I got a dot of Great Stuff on 15 years ago. I can't get it off. Doesn't matter how many times I've washed it. Doesn't matter. It's not coming off. Cutting a hole in the shirt, I think it would still probably be there. So the last but not least here is document. Right? Take notes of issues. You will find on your sticks a copy of this really simple, free to steal off the internet and give credit to maintenance log, but feel free to use your own. I tend to keep one of these on the front of my racks or in a place in my demo room so that I ask people to do stuff. Now, what I tell people, because if you create a maintenance log and say, I want you to go through and carefully log every single issue, everybody who does work for you is going to hear essay portion of the day and they're not going to want to do it. Right? You don't need that much information. What day is it? What did you find? What did you fix? Who were you? That's really all you need. But if you have people going in and doing this maintenance, and every time they open the rack, they put a little bit of information down, right? Found water intrusion on the CEM. Hey, we seem to see that every 6 months. That's a problem. We're always resetting breaker 25. There's a reason for that, right? Breakers don't just decide that they want some love, usually. So there's reasons that some of these things are happening, and sometimes it's hard to find patterns, especially if you have multiple venues and you have multiple people working in your venues. Right, when you finally get them all together and you look at this and you go, hey, what's up with breaker 25? And half the room goes, oh yeah, it always does that. And you're like, well, why didn't you tell me? Right, we could have solved this problem a long time ago if I knew. So that kind of stuff works really well. Just a simple maintenance log gives you the ability to track problems and keep things moving forward. Accessories, they need power and data. Sometimes that power and data comes from a single connection, like a PoE switch. Other times they need power and data, so make sure they're getting both, and both of those are clean and being fed. Response boxes, nodes, things like that have a configuration. They got configured and you got them. How many of you have gateways or response nodes or something in your facilities? How many of you have a copy of that configuration stored somewhere other than in the gateway? How many of you have 2 copies of it stored following the 3-2-1 rule? You do? All right. Right there. Right there. Okay. So it's just like a show file, right? If you lose all of your gateway configuration, that makes for a not very fun day. So make sure you have a copy. Make sure you have a copy offsite. Switches, network switches. If you've got an equipment rack, I guarantee you have a network switch. Those are not long-time, permanent, forever devices. So keep an eye on it. Make sure you're testing switch ports, especially if you're having problems, right? If you have switches, if you have ports that are starting to fail, don't just say, oh yeah, they're bad. It's time to think about maybe replacing that switch with another one. They are not forever and ever type devices, so it is something to be aware of. Keep an idea of what your addresses are. I don't know if you guys have talked about IP addressing and network configuration stuff in here yet. Have we talked about that yet? Okay. That was the last class I taught, so it's like all in my head. But if you have all of you have network gear, what are their addresses supposed to be? 10 dot something, right? And that's great. That's good that you know that part. That's like half the battle right there. But get a printout, right? Launch consort, launch conductors. Get a printout of what those addresses are so that you know what they are. So if you have to swap out a rack, or you have to swap out a CEM, or you need to get a node back in and running in the middle of your show, you know what that address is so that you can get it back in and reconfigured. Right? It's not really maintenance, but in a sense it is. Right? It's getting your infrastructure documented to the point that you can fix it and swap it if you have to. Know what your software versions are. It helps people like Sasha when you call her and say things aren't working. I'm going to pick on her because she's in the back of the room. But it helps her when on phone support when you say, hey, this isn't working, and you can tell me what version of software it is, because we can say, yeah, it just does that. Or, yeah, we can fix that, or know what's going on, or know what some of the interactions are. So these are all things to be aware of with your accessories. Last but not least on this, because it should totally be on the slide and isn't, is if you have an equipment rack and you have a UPS in that equipment rack, make sure you test it regularly. UPSs have a lifespan. UPSs typically have a 6 to 10 year lifespan if you are lucky. I saw you nodding your head. You've been burned by this, I'm guessing. Yeah. They do not last forever, and they do not tell you that they have stopped working. And the only way you find out is the worst possible way to find out your backup power isn't around. You've had this happen. Yeah, so make sure, if you do nothing else when you go back to your facility, is just hit the test button on your UPS, because chances are, if it's been there for 4 or 5 years, you may see a fault kick on, which means it's time to replace it. Don't do it when you have to. Do it now before you have to. Make sense so far? Questions, comments, war stories? All right, let's talk about fixtures. Everybody's excited now. Woohoo! Let's talk about fixtures. Fixtures I break down into 3 categories, and it depends on the fixture in terms of inspecting, cleaning, and bench focusing. Obviously, you're not going to be bench focusing an LED fixture. I know. Woohoo, right? See, everybody hates bench focusing. I love bench focusing.
As an ETC guy, I would beg to differ.
You feel
Bench focusing.
bench focusing? You like bench focusing, or you hate bench focusing?
No, bench focusing an LED fixture.
An LED fixture?
Yeah, you do make a source forward.
That's true. You will need to bench focus the source forward. I stand corrected. You are absolutely right. No, I appreciate you mentioning that. Here. All right. Now everybody's like, oh, I want to catch him. Don't worry, you might. So clean, inspect, and bench focus, even your LED fixtures. You're going to want to make sure all of those get checked. When you're dealing with tungsten fixtures, a couple of things to look at with those. I have one over here. We're going to walk through some of this. I'll move the color source out of the way. All right. You've got a bunch of different components that exist in this. May I have a volunteer? You in the back raised your hand first. We have a couple of tools when cleaning a source 4. They're highly specialized. You have yet another, right, not the same, yet another clean, dry, never touched paint in the history of the universe paintbrush. I'll give you tool number 1. You may or may not have a lint-free cloth. That was for the one of the ones wasn't for the console. You may or may not need to use Goo Gone. If you tape all your fixtures and you hate tape on your fixtures, then Goo Gone becomes your friend. For the outside, not the inside, not for the lenses, not for anything like that. And last but certainly not least, we might need a screwdriver. Actually, there was one more thing. Graphite. Hey, it's even right side up. Graphite for those of you that are watching. Okay, so we come over to our fixture. And you can do it from the front or the back or wherever you care to stand. I'll stand over here. So we're going to want to do a couple of things to clean McKinney's. Yes?
Quick aside, well, how does it affect finishes?
This is not really, I've yet to see this affect finishes. I have yet to see this affect the paint on the fixture. I wouldn't want to use anything harder than this. I used to use denatured alcohol a lot, and now I don't. Yes?
I was just going to add, there's more than one kind of Goo Gone. There's like a Goo Gone that's more viscous, and you should really read the labels on that because it does affect things that standard Goo Gone does not.
Right. I just use standard store-bought Goo Gone.
Yeah.
That's just a simple one. And a bottle like this could last you a really, really, really long time. Pretty much what I'm using this for is if people are putting tape marks on my fixtures, if people are putting Sharpie on the side of the fixture, stuff like that, if I want to get that clean. Maybe you don't, right? Maybe those tape marks live there for a reason. When I worked at UCLA, I worked we had three different venues that we shared inventory back and forth in, or they were supposed to go to a designated inventory, but people would try to steal whatever they could. And there had been all kinds of different ideas and philosophies and styles about how to mark the fixtures so that they knew where they could go. And what I did is I went and got a bunch of Avery label templates that had labels that had a hole in them and some little wire ties. And I printed them. I'd print out sheets that identified what the fixture was because I was working with students who didn't necessarily know it was much other than the black thing that light came out of. Right? So I would say it's an ETC source 4, it's this degree, and I can't tell what that one's degree is. So it's an ETC source 4, it's a 26 degree fixture, and it goes to this theater. And then I would wire tie it to one of the open and available holes on the fixture. And when we hug it, I would pull it off and I would drop it in a recycling bin and I would print more of them. And that way I knew where it needed to be all the way up until the point that it got there, and then it just went in the trash. Because I hate tape on fixtures. I hate tape on fixtures for a lot of reasons. One, it's one more thing I have to clean. Two, the audience can see it. And that's a big aesthetic for me as a master electrician and a production electrician, is I want the lights to be as invisible as possible except for the bright part when the audience is watching the show. So that's what I started doing. And it worked, and if people stole them, they stole them. And if they forgot to take the tags off, occasionally a tag would fall down, and I stopped that real quick. But they were cheap enough that 2 cents a piece that it was in the length of things, it was an easier way to deal with it. Okay, so when we're getting ready to clean the fixture, we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to want to deal with the lamp and the socket. We're going to talk about the lenses, and we're going to talk about the reflector. So first step is to remove the base from the back of the fixture. Everybody's done this before? That was a question. There was a little bit of an up at the end of that. All right, so flathead screwdriver. Brett-o. What's a quarter? Here we go. Other tools. Okay, so I take the lamp out because I'm going to want to do a couple of things with the lamp first and foremost. I'm going to want to clean it, and I'm going to want to inspect it. You don't want to touch it, right? Do not touch the lamp. You want to touch it?
No, you said you like to touch things.
I do. I like to touch things. Here, lint-free cloth, right? So you want to pull the lamp out. What I do when I pull the lamp out is not touch it, right? I like to touch dirty things, but not lamps. That's just bad. That's not all I'm going to say. Right? When someone's like, yeah, I need a new bulb, you know you found somebody who should be cutting gel for you. So you're going to want to look at the lamp, and the first thing I take a look at when I pull it out, before I even start cleaning it, is I look at the pins themselves. Now what I'm looking for is corrosion, pitting, damage like that. That is a disease. Does anybody know why it happens? Do you know why it arcs? You're not getting a full fit into the base. In the US, we're dealing with 60 hertz power, right? Which means this is getting turned on and off 60 times a second. And to get all sciencey and physicky in a moderate way that those online can prove me wrong with Wikipedia, and then you'll get a thing too, david.fox@etcconnect.com. Not really my email address. What happens is, as this lights up, which is a byproduct of it being electrified, you're also getting a little bit of motion. And if it's not fully secured, that's why they shake. That's why they make noise sometimes too, but that's why they shake. And if it's not fully secured, that's why you get that pitting, is because you're actually getting enough motion that it arcs. If it's pitting, if it's arcing, that doesn't go away. You can pull out a file, you can file the pitting and the arcing off, it's not going to change it. If I take that pitted arc lamp and I put it in another fixture, it's like watching Contagion, man. You just sent it to somebody else, and now that fixture is going to do the same thing. If I take a new lamp and I put it into that base, that lamp's eventually going to die too, because you pitted out the base as well. So it's an inevitable byproduct of the tungsten process, but it is something to be aware of. So I take a look to see. Depending on how horrible it looks, right? If it's like super thin, or it's really black, or it's really disgusting, maybe that's a time to just say it's time for a new lamp. But it's also time for a new base. And those are pretty easy to take apart and fix. You have a copy of this diagram on your sticks as well, so you can see how all these components come apart if need be. We do sell these as extra bases as well, so if you need to replace it, you can. Do yourself a favor. Don't save the money. A lot of people will do these and go, I just want to buy this ceramic. Because those are like really cheap, whereas buying the assembly with the wires and everything attached to it is like, I don't know, $60,000. It's way cheaper than that. Buy the whole assembly, because just buying the mica will save you a lot of money, and you will spend all of that money that you saved in time having to rewire every single piece. Right? So just that's my recommendation. I take that from, not because I work here, but from when I used to deal with it. I can spend 5 to 10 minutes and rewire the lamp, or I can spend 30 minutes and rewire the lamp. Where's my time best served? Not 30 minutes of rewiring and screwing in mica. So I'll take a look, I'll make sure it looks good, I'll give the lamp a clean. Again, there's a lot of different rules that you can go by with this. I tend to take if I'm willing to put it on my glasses, I'd be willing to put it on the lamp rule. You don't want to use commercial glass cleaners for the same reason you wouldn't want to put them on your glasses. They're going to leave a residue. So a little bit of isopropyl alcohol or some lens wipes works. A small dish with a lint-free cloth, that can work too. And really, whether or not you clean them with alcohol really depends on how dirty they are. A lot of times they're just not that dirty at all. So we can put the lamp back together. We'll leave it out of the housing, however, while we do the rest of the work that we're going to do. Excellent. If you don't have those lamp retainers in your source 4 fixtures, you should give us a call. Thank you. Perfect, a good wipe. Okay, so the next thing we're ready to start dealing with is the lens. So we're going to take the lens tube out. To do this, you unscrew it all the way. Everybody's done this before? Okay. Herein begins one of the major places where I differ from what our manuals say. If you read our manuals, they talk about a number of different cleaning solutions for cleaning your fixtures. Water, distilled water, vinegar, alcohol and water, alcohol and distilled vinegar. Distilled vinegar and water, all kinds of mixes of all kinds of different things. And I used a whole bunch of different solutions over my life. And ultimately, I just used distilled water and a can of air. I stopped using everything else because it didn't make that big of a difference. And dealing with things like 10% denatured alcohol and 90% distilled water, smelled like it did a lot more, but it really wasn't, right? All you're really doing is you're just getting the fixtures clean, right? So a little bit of air, a lint-free cloth, maybe some water if I need it, some distilled water if I need it is the way to go. If you can buy distilled water, if it's in your budget, go buy some. If you can't buy distilled water, go find an air conditioner, pull the outlet tube out of the back of the air conditioner and stick it in an empty gallon bottle and wait, and you will have distilled water. It's scientific. I learned that when I was working in a shop because we went through gallons of distilled water at a time cleaning foggers. So we just went to the main air conditioning and put it into a 5-gallon bucket and generated 5 gallons of distilled water every day for free, out of the air. The atmosphere gave it to us. Thank you, nature. So you use those tools to clean it. The other big question and debate that comes up is, do I take it apart and clean the lenses? And I spent years and made probably way more money than I should have charged people to do that as a service until I knew better. Because typically you don't need to, right? In a single lens system, it's really easy. But it was in the dual lens system where you're like, oh, I should take these apart. And I used to go through and I'd take it apart, I'd soak everything in distilled water and get it clean, and I'd put them all back together. And you want to be careful with what solvents you use because you don't want the paint dot to come off, because that's a bad day. But you do all kinds of stuff to clean them. But what I really discovered is if it's just dust, just air and a little bit of a cloth to wipe some dust off if you need to. There's a guy who does all of the fixture preparation and cleaning work at PRG in New York who has created this series of little contraptions that he uses that are like little wire hangers with pieces of lint-free cloth connected to them that are bent at angles so that he reaches them in and wipes off the front lens and doesn't take anything apart. And you can do the same thing. Don't take the lens apart unless you really, really, really have to, because it's just more work. It's a lot more work, and it makes maintaining and cleaning the fixture a really long process, and an unnecessarily long process at that point. Yes?
What if you've got things significantly dirtier than dust?
Sure, if you've got something that's dirtier than dust, right, you've got outdoor fixtures or things like that that are just not going to come clean, then maybe you need to. But once you get them clean, if you're going to clean them on a more regular basis, you probably won't need to do it all the time.
No, I mean, like, the whole thing is significantly dirtier than dust.
Are you dealing with like fog residue or?
Well, I worked in a theme park, so vomit, pyro, dust, and liquid nitrogen.
Sure. Not your typical mixture of theater fun, but the byproducts therein. Wire brush can work. You might want to replace the castings in certain areas if the wires are scoring. At that point, I might look at some slightly more abrasive yet delicate solvents. I might move to alcohol or vinegar at that point. I prefer vinegar over alcohol. I think the acid in vinegar works a little bit better to clean off the outsides of metals than alcohol does, because alcohol wants to evaporate and vinegar just wants to smell bad. So I'll use vinegar over alcohol if I get that choice. On glass, I prefer alcohol because I want it to evaporate. So at that point, maybe take those things apart. If you're going to take things apart, slowly, carefully, methodically, you want to take them apart. You want to make sure you're working in small batches so that you don't get things mixed up. One of the big things, especially if you have a range of various source cores of various ages, is we sometimes did one lens, sometimes we did two lenses, sometimes we went back to one lens. You don't want to mix those up, so just keep them sorted well. Those are the things I would do to get that stuff clean. So that's 5 minutes to me. Okay, so next thing to look at, here, I'm going to give you both, because you stood up here for a really long time. Thank you very much, Brian. So other things to look at, we talked about what I'll do now. Typically what I'll try to do is hang this on a pipe. And I was going to have a pipe here today, but we don't, so we improvise. But I'll typically make a pipe stand that's about yay high so I can do one fixture at a time so that I don't have to keep my hands on it while I'm doing all this or have it on the table. While it's sitting out like this, I'll run the shutters up and down, little bit of powdered graphite and a very small paintbrush. And I'll typically put this into like the top of an electrical tape container, dip the paintbrush into it, wipe it on the shutters. You just want the shutters to move freely. But the big key if you're doing graphite on your shutters is this is the point to do it, not while this is sitting in the bottom of the fixture. All right? Because otherwise, what do you end up doing? You end up making dirty everything you just cleaned. So get it nice and clean. Depending on the connection here, I'll check this, look for carbon and scoring. If this was a 3-pin or a stage pin connection, which I know it is not, what I will do is then pull out a specialized and slightly expensive tool. And it's not a paintbrush this time. It's pin splitter. How many of you own a pin splitter? Lots of people own a pin splitter. If you used to own a pin splitter, now's your opportunity to own a pin splitter. If you're a tool geek, and I'm guessing at least 50% of the room is a tool geek or willing to admit that they are in this room because we're all amongst friends, come check out this pin splitter. I know, how often does somebody look at you and go, hey, check out my pin splitter? Right? But this particular pin splitter, and here's your ooh moment, pin splitter number 4. Ooh, beta tested the pin splitter. So come check this one out because it's metal. Ooh. I'll just leave that there. I expect it to stay on the table when I come back. All right, enough said. So you'd want to split your pins. Last but certainly not least in this, we did that. We get here. Bench focusing. Everybody's favorite thing. Is it? Is it not? Okay. Here's the deal. Feel free to gasp in shock. Don't bench focus when you maintenance your fixtures. Bench focus every time you focus. When I do a show, the process by which the fixtures get hung is you take the fixture, you hang it on the pipe, you circuit it, you clean up your cable, clove hitches only, people. You get it all cleaned up, and when you heat it up to light it to make sure that it works before you go airborne, that's when you do your bench focus, and not while you maintain it, because all it's going to do is knock out of focus anyway. That's when I do my bench focusing. When bench focusing, I take the Tom Littrell approach. He taught me this, I steal it, I use it all the time. Before you bench focus the fixture, and if I know I'm maintaining and the next thing they're going to do is get bench focused, is I take the fixture and I squeeze it back as far as it will go, and then I tighten it down. And then I put it in. Is this perfectly bench focused? No, this is going to be god-awful horrible. Right? But the key is now anybody who needs to bench focus the fixture only needs to move this back knob in one direction. So it's not a question of in or out, it's always going to be out. Right? You're always just going to unscrew it, and then you can work on your center alignment. So it makes it really easy to figure out which way you need to go. Really cool tip. Tom came up with that one. Once it's all set and it's been prepped to bench focus, then it goes into the fixture itself. And I'm not going to screw this in because that's just hateful. Finger tight works, right? The goal is to connect it in a way that it will not fall out, not to create a molecular bond between the metals. Maybe I've said that to people before. So there's a chart that you have in here about bench focusing and which ways to go. Always teach bench focusing class to your crew, your students. If they're new to your crew, they're your student, at least for the day. If they refuse to be your student, they probably shouldn't be on your crew. That's another conversation. But this is just bench focus when you hang. Don't bother trying to do it any other time because you're just wasting your time. It's just a waste of time. And if you get in the habit of bench focusing every single time when the designer's like, that fixture looks weird, when was it last bench focused? You can go, well, right before we hung it. Oh. You win. Yay, I beat the designer. All right, LED fixtures. They get a little bit of love too. Don't forget we can give love to our LED fixtures. Not as much love is required, right? Dusting still works. If it's a source forward, you definitely want to work on doing some of the bench focusing for that. I got to play with those because I don't know that Tom's trick is going to work just as well to bench focus those specifically. Shutters and reflectors as well. Remember, in these, there is a reflector in there. You can reach in if you need to. And if it's starting to yellow or it's starting to get gross on the inside, just wipe it out or a blast of air. You don't want to be removing the reflectors from your fixtures. How many of you have ever had to put a reflector back into a fixture before? That's not a fun experience. Although step one is shatter the old reflector to get it out.
Getting one out intact is nearly impossible.
Getting one out intact is nearly impossible. I will tell you that the way we replace fixtures, or we replace reflectors, is to smash them to get them out. And then we have a special jig that we use to put them in, which is this piece of 4-pronged wood that the reflector fits into, that you then put the fixture body on top of and press with all of your weight down on to get it to fit in.
The directions on replacing it are actually it's pretty simple.
Yeah.
You're just picking up the 3 points and popping them in. So.
Yeah, they've gotten better, but they used to really suck. In the first couple of iterations of the Source 4 reflector, they were really painful. They've gotten slightly less painful. With LED fixtures, a lot of them don't have a reflector. What? I know, crazy, right? If you've looked on the inside, though, what you'll find is the tube is mirrored on the inside, so that can sometimes just get a white. But again, that's usually lensed on both ends, so a little blast of air is really all you need, and that'll get that cleaned. Really quickly, and to wrap us up, because Sasha, I guess I'm coming up on time.
You are done.
I am done.
Time-wise.
I am done time-wise. Do we want to talk about tools, or do you guys want to go get lunch? Bonus round, tools. Okay, so let's talk a quick little teeny bit about tools. With tools, there's a couple of tools that we carry. I would recommend you have something like this just in your kit and around. You can come up and look at the various wackiness of that is tools that I carry. I'm a big tool geek, so I have lots of tools and I like to show them off. A Gizmo, the new is a DMX tester that you can use. Maybe you have one of these. It's a great way to be able to troubleshoot and test DMX type devices to make sure you know exactly where the fault lies. The new hotness right now is the DMX Cat. These just came out. We started playing with them and we really, really dig them. I see a couple of people nodding their heads yes. This is a Bluetooth compatible device that works with an app on your phone. So you plug this in to the DMX line and you turn it on and you launch an app on your phone and it gives you real-time monitoring and testing and wire checking and all kinds of stuff. So it's really cool and they're not that expensive.
$330
Yeah.
for your friends at City.
They're $300-ish. So like way less than the $70,000 I charge you for it. So go for that. A voltmeter, or RMS meter if you can afford to buy one, and if you're doing a lot of measuring of dimming, you should, because a standard voltmeter will lie to you every time you try to meter a power cube. Root mean square meter is required to actually get a real power reading. Network testing tool, there are a lot of them. Depending on how simple or how much money you want to spend, you can go with something really simple, like these little devices, which will basically just test the pins to see if they work. If you want to spend a little bit more money, like you've got a lot of network stuff, and if you're willing to shell out $300 for a DMX Cat, you'd probably be willing to shell out $134 for the Klein Scout, which is a much more detailed Cat5 network testing tool. It'll tell you pins, it'll tell you length, it'll tell you all kinds of stuff. Really handy, right? I can't tell if this piece of network gear is working, and the network light will lie to you all day long. So you want something like that. Software. Streaming ACN View is a great piece of free software that you can find. If you type in SACN View into the Googles, this was developed by a bunch of ETC people. It is not an ETC product, but it will allow you to connect your computer up to a lighting network and check what's happening on all of the available ACN streaming ACN universes, so you can see what's out there and what's going on. It's like the DMXter for streaming ACN. It'll let you playback looks and all kinds of stuff. Concert is also a great useful tool if you have a bunch of ETC gear and Net3 gear. You can run it on your console, you can run it on a standalone laptop, Windows only, and you can see what's going on your network, run network maps, and do some configuration. Last but certainly not least is your melon, right? This is the best tool you can bring with you. So sleep occasionally, eat occasionally. Don't try to break the how long can I stay awake record every time you load in a show. So that you can remain that calm, cool, collected center. And that wraps us up. So thank you all for coming into class today. I know lunch is starting. I'm happy to hang out and answer additional questions. I see you got a hand up. So
You might want to suggest to clean your cleaning tools.
clean your cleaning tools. That's a good one. Oh, I like that. That was good.
There's a lot of people that never think to do that.
Yeah, cleaning your cleaning tools is a good one. Thank you all. There are online and paper evaluations. If you are an ETCP person, you did just earn 75 minutes of ETCP credit. So feel free to come fill out that form. If you want to come check out the pin splitter, ask questions, tell me horror stories, please do. Otherwise, enjoy your day and have a great rest of your classes.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Ben folks.
Yes, sir.
Focusing on whatever.
Yeah.
The in and out is easy. Getting the center.